Hey there, it's Mitzi. Welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to share an update. I didn't get to update last week because I was out of town. We went to the lake for a few days. It was Mother's Day and there was a lot going on with that. And then this week, today's actually my birthday, so we're celebrating my birthday this week. Next week is Memorial Day, so it's just really busy around here, but good busy. A lot of fun things that are happening, and of course I've been spending more time outside in my garden as well. But I did want to update you because I am still reading lots of great books, so I wanted to share those. I have been participating in a couple of readathons, and so I wanted to talk about that first. The first one I want to talk about is Middle Grade Mayhem. There is a middle grade May kind of readathon that goes on, and I read I think 4 books that were middle grade, and so I thought that I would take that opportunity. I love reading middle grade anyway, but I would take that opportunity to read some Newberries. So the first one I want to tell you about is The Story of Mankind by Hendrik van Loon. I have this very old copy of this book, and it's a thick book and it is a boring book. I did not like this book at all. It is, let's see, how many pages? 898 pages of boring. I just did not like it. It is just what it says, The Story of Mankind, and it's like reading an encyclopedia, and I do not see how this won the first Newbery. This was the first winner of the Newbery in, I think, 1922, I think is when it started, so this, I think, was published in 1921, somewhere around there. But yeah, super boring. It goes through, it starts with, you know, starting as some blob in the swamp or whatever and forming into an animal and then to man. Well, of course, I don't believe that anyway because I'm a Christian. But regardless of that, you know, I was fine with, okay, a lot of people believe in evolution. That's fine. I didn't have a problem with reading that. It was just so blame boring. I mean, even after we got to the good parts, the things in the Roman Empire. This chapter's about the Roman Empire. It was just dry. Here's what it was. Here's the facts. And it was just an overview all the way from the beginning to the point that this was written. Super boring. I do not recommend it. I did read the whole thing. I'm proud that I finished. And the only reason is because I'm trying to read all the Newberries and I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to DNF any Newberries. I'm reading them. So I made myself finish this, and what I did was I've been reading this probably since January. I've had it on my nightstand and I was going to finish it. So I did. Yay for me. The Story of Mankind. I don't know why that won. If you've read The Story of Mankind, let me know if you struggled with it. I know you did, because I don't know of anybody that would like that book. I don't know of anybody, and certainly not a child, for a Newbery to be a winner of the Newbery. Just don't understand that. Anyway, I did read that one. The next one I read was for Middle Grade Mayhem. It fulfilled a prompt for that readathon, and it's called Julie of the Wolves. It is a Newbery, and I highly recommend this. If you're trying to read the Newbery especially, go ahead and grab this one. It's great. It's not very long. I read this in a day because it was such a page turner, and I really enjoyed it. Julie is a young girl who is struggling with, you know, the modernization of her lifestyle. Her family has all these traditions within their culture, and she's trying to come to terms with that sort of life with the modern way of life, as well as she loves nature and animals and preserving that relationship with the animals and nature, and the way that the modern society is pretty much destroying that. She struggles through that through this story. I highly recommend it. I really enjoyed that one. And then I read, this is not a Newbery, but it's one that I wanted to read, and my son wanted to read it too, so we read it together. It didn't take us long. He loves Hugo Cabret and Wonderstruck, and he hasn't read any other Brian Selznick. I mean, I think he read those in middle school. But we decided we would pick up The Marvels because neither one of us had read it. And I found this great copy at Second and Charles, one of our used bookstores. probably a few months ago, and so he said he would read it too, so he grabbed a copy and we read through it. It looks very long, and it is because there's a lot of illustrations, but it's not. It's probably 200 pages maybe as a story itself. The rest are illustrations, which is what Brian Selznick usually does, and I love his work. I think he's a genius. I really enjoyed reading through this one. I didn't enjoy this one as much as the other two I read. This one it starts out with this, it's all pictures at the beginning, the story, and then you have a story there, and then you get a story in words, and then you go back to a story at the end in the illustrations. That's how this one's set up. This is a story within a story, and I always love those, but there was in the middle of the book, and my son felt the same way. We loved the beginning, the pictures. We loved the beginning of the word story, the one told in words. But in the middle of the one told in words, it was almost like he just didn't know where to go, maybe. I'm not sure. So in the middle of it, something happens and you're like, oh really, that's what this is? And it kind of deflated both of us. Now after we were used to, okay, that's actually what's taking place, so that's why I'm not giving you a premise on this. Just if you enjoy that kind of illustrations and then the story like Brian Selznick does, I do recommend this, but I don't want to give you a premise because it'll kind of spoil this. So anyway, in the middle of it you find out what's really happening, and it kind of deflated it. But then after we were used to, okay, that's what we had accepted, that's what this is, it became better, and we ended up really enjoying the story. And then at the end, there is an author's note that really made a difference. Once we read the author's note, then was like, oh, okay, I get this. So maybe I should have read the author's note first, but I don't know, because it might have spoiled the premise of the story. I'm not sure, but I do recommend The Marvels. It wasn't my favorite Brian Selznick, but I did enjoy reading that one. And then my favorite that I read for the middle grade mayhem, to fulfill a prompt, this was one that Elizabeth at Lizzie Faye Loves Books, she had recommended for her prompt, and so I read it because I knew I had it on my shelf, and that is Ginger Pie by Eleanor Estes, and it is again a Newbery. This is fantastic. I could read books like this all day long. These are the kind of middle grade books I love. They're just simple times, simple fun, very, I don't know when was this one published, because it feels like Henry Huggins. If you've ever read Beverly Cleary, that's what this feels like. A very 1950s sort of story of, you know, everyday life with kids doing their thing. And this centers around this little boy who wants a dog. They end up getting a dog and naming it Ginger Pie. And it's an adventure with the little boy and his dog, and what happens. There's a mystery involved. I'm telling you, when I was a kid, these are the kind of books I like to read, and I still love reading them. So thank you to Elizabeth for recommending this one. I really enjoyed it. I also noticed when I was looking up Eleanor Estes, because I want to read some more of her books, she's written some other things. She had written The 100 Dresses, and I remember really enjoying that one. Now that book's a lot more serious than this one is, but it's not very long, and I do recommend it too. But I do want to read more by this author because I really enjoyed this book. And then I read another D.E. Stevenson. It wasn't for a readathon or anything. It was just something I wanted to get read this spring. And that was Anna and Her Daughters. Now, I don't have a real pretty cover or anything on this. I found this book at a library sale and threw it in my bag. I think it was one of those fill a tote for so much money. So that's why I ended up with this copy. I loved this, but I love everything by D.E. Stevenson that I've read so far. If you enjoy D.E. Stevenson's writing, if you've read like Miss Bunkle's book or any of the others, you probably would love this one too, because this is her typical writing style. In this particular one, it is about Anna and her daughter, so a mother and her children, and it's really about the relationship of the daughters. There is one daughter that the story is from her point of view, and so it's her story, but it's how she gets along with her siblings as well as her mother, and how they navigate their relationship from the early years, their teenage years, until pretty much the end. So it's, I find that interesting about D.E. Stevenson. Her books are not long. This is probably less than 300 pages, but it feels like a saga. And I don't mean that in a long, drawn-out way. I mean, she tells that much of a story in a short amount of pages. And I find that to be fascinating. I love it. So if you like sagas, you might want to pick this up. And I found that in the last book I read of D.E. Stevenson, it felt like that too. It's kind of like she goes through a whole lifetime, but in a few pages. And I like the way she does it. So if you're wanting a saga, but you're short on time, you might want to pick up Anna and Her Daughters. But I did enjoy this. And something else I wanted to mention, I have these post-it notes to remind me. She mentions, she nods to Robert Louis Stevenson, which I think she's related to him somehow. I think like a great uncle or something. If you're not familiar with Robert Louis Stevenson, he wrote Treasure Island, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, those books. And so he was related to her somehow. So she gives a little nod to him. The character in this story is like on this tour in this town, and they go to where Robert Louis Stevenson did something. So I thought that was cute. And then the other tab is Miss Bunkle's book is mentioned. Now it doesn't say Miss Bunkle's book, but the mother says, I once read a book about a woman who wrote a book about her neighbors and they weren't at all pleased. Well, that's the premise of Miss Bunkle's book. So if you've read her, you know, that book, Miss Bunkle's book, you would get that in here. And I thought that was cute. I don't know if others are mentioned because I haven't read that many D.E. Stevenson, but now I'm going to be looking for that because I think it's fun if she, you know, plants those things through her books. If you're, you know, if you are a reader, a big fan of hers, you would get those things along the way. So I did enjoy that about it too. I highly recommend Anna and Her Daughters by D.E. Stevenson, and I will be reading more. If you've read a D.E. Stevenson that's your favorite, let me know in the comments because I'm going to continue through her works. And then finally, I read Yours is the Night. This was my favorite read so far this month. I loved this book. It's by Amanda Dykes, and I will be reading more because she writes beautifully. Thank you to Miriam for mentioning this book. I loved it. We actually had a conversation about it. I told her, she'd commented on one of my previous videos, and I told her, I was like, girl, I am reading that book. So we ended up chatting on Voxer about it, and that made it even better because I was chomping at the bit to talk to somebody about the book. So I was glad that she could you know, discuss it with me right after I finished. It was such a great book. Anyway, this book is about, it's set in World War I, and it's about this American soldier who goes to fight in France. And while he's there, there is this Angel of Aragon, I think is what they call her. It's this mysterious Angel of Aragon. They hear her singing like in the woods. And so the soldiers are kind of comforted by this angel. And there's like a legend behind that while they're there fighting. Well, you know, of course he hears about that. Well, he discovers that it's actually a real girl out there in this forest. And so he and two other soldiers, it's three of them, these three soldiers help her kind of escape this war zone. And it's about all of their relationships getting her to safety. And there's a lot of twists and turns along the way to make it even more dramatic, really. But what stood out for me mostly, first of all, the writing is beautiful. If you journal and you like quotes and things from your books, get your pen ready because there's lots of beautiful quotes and just beautiful words and turns of phrases and things in this book. I really recommend it just for that because it's like a song. It's like singing off the page. So beautiful writing. But also what I loved about it was the dynamic cast of characters. Everyone in here they all changed. Even the secondary characters, not just the primary characters, but even the secondary characters had a backstory, and they all came to the story at the beginning with their own ideas about life, and then it shows them gradually change, and at the end how they've all changed through this experience. So I like that it wasn't just the two main characters, but also all these other characters as well. And it was a natural progression. It wasn't like she just stuck things in, because a lot of times, you know, in a lot of these kind of stories, there'll be an A story and then a B story. In this, it's so woven together you can't see that, and it's just like I said, a natural progression where everyone has their own story and they change throughout. So I found that to be wonderfully done in this book, and I don't see that very often. So great job to Amanda Dykes for that. If you've read any Amanda Dykes, let me know. I had talked to Miriam about, okay, where do I go next? And she gave me some recommendations. So I will be reading more from her. I highly recommend this. This was fantastic. So those are the books that I've been reading this week. Again, it's been super busy, but a wonderful busy of wonderful things going on with my family, and things at church, and just different things, you know, the springtime and all those wonderful things that are happening. What have you been reading? What has been happening around your neck of the woods? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.